Hello, and welcome to my session about open source reconnaissance, where I am going to show you a few ways attackers collect information from sources on the internet and how you can use the same techniques to find information during bug bounty hunting or your penetration testing work. My name is Vicky, and I am a security researcher focusing on web security. And when I approach a target to look for vulnerabilities, the first thing that I do is to conduct reconnaissance about the target. So, first off, let's talk about what recon is. Recon is the process of collecting information about a target that you are hacking. You conduct recon to gather information about the organization or the application to find out all the possible ways of attacking it. And in particular, when you're hacking a web application, you're looking for information about the application's functionalities, its development process, its configuration, and its underlying hardware and software versions. So, in short, you are looking for anything about the application that will help you attack it. There are two different approaches that you can take to find this type of information: active and passive recon. Active recon techniques actively engage with target servers to gain information about a system. For example, network scanning, port scanning, and active fingerprinting are all active recon techniques. Active recon techniques tend to be very accurate because information is being extracted directly from the server. But they also tend to take up more time because you need to interact with the target and analyze its responses yourself. Plus, they're not always ideal because they are easier to detect and they often generate a lot of noise in server logs. So, if you need to be secretive or non intrusive, like in most bug bounty and penetration testing situations, you will want to opt for a more passive recon strategy instead. Passive recon techniques, on the other hand, are the ones that don't engage with the target application as much. But when you do it right, they can potentially help you achieve the same results and get all the same information as active recon. One of these passive recon techniques is to collect open source information. Very often, the information that you need is already found by someone else and documented by someone else on the internet. So if you can find and use these online resources efficiently, you can save time and reduce the risk of detection when you are doing your recon. So today, I am going to tell you about a few of my favorite tools to conduct open source recon with. In particular, I will show you how to do open source recon using search engines, code repositories, code sharing platforms, as well as a few other resources. Let's get started. Let's first start with collecting information using search engines. You should start your recon process by looking for pages exposed to the internet that tells you something about the target. And the best way to do that is by using search engines. Speaking of search engines, the one that is used the most for hacking is probably Google. In fact, Google is so useful for recon that there is a special term for it. Recon using Google is called Google hacking or Google dorking, and the search terms used during Google hacking are called Google dorks. Google search is a very powerful tool, and you can use it to find out things like an application's frameworks, the brands and versions of their servers and databases, obscure paths and subdomains are not linked to the main site, as well as crucial files like hidden admin portals, backdoors, and leaked credential files. And aside from using simple keywords, Google Search lets you use many different operators to narrow your search results. Let's do some research on Facebook, for example. You can use the site operator to specify the domain that you want to search for, and the ext operator to specify an extension of the file type that you want to look for. So to look for a PHP file on Facebook that contains the keyword admin, you can search for site, facebook.com, and exe, php, and finally admin. And another useful feature of Google search is tools. Here, you can filter by the time that the page was last updated, so you can look for only the newly updated PHP files on Facebook. And in addition to constructing search queries by yourself, you can use search queries in the Google Hacking database as well. The Google Hacking database is located at exploitdatabase.com and is a website where people share search queries for finding security related information. Let's take a look at what we can find here. You can see that there's a list of published Google Docs here that other hackers have designed to look for very specific pieces of information. And the database sorts its queries into categories. You can filter by category by going to Filter and then Category. Let's start by looking at the File Containing Passwords category. This dork looks for .env files with the term db_password in its contents. And the .env extension looks for environmental configuration files. So this dork basically looks for exposed configuration files that contains database passwords. And to look for the configuration file of a particular target, you can simply add the domain name to the query using a site specifier. And you can see here that facebook.com does not have an exposed.env file that contains database passwords. Let's go ahead and look at another dork. You can use Google Dorks to find hidden admin portals as well. And to do that, let's go to the Pages Containing Login Portals categories and look for Jira logins. So in addition to filtering by category, we can also search for specific dorks using keywords. Let's search for the keyword Jira. So /Jira/login is actually a pretty common path for Jira login portals. So this dork looks for pages that have /Jira/login in its URL. This type of queries can help you really quickly find your target's important login portals. You can then brute force the login with common passwords or with stolen or leaked credentials. And finally, you can also look for unprotected resources of particular sites using dorks. For example, let's go ahead and look for dorks that search for unprotected Jenkins dashboards. This dork looks for Jenkins dashboards that do not require a login. And when you search for these terms using Google, you can see that we found many exposed dashboards here. Another source of information that you can use is intelligence search engines like Shodan and GreyHat Warfare. Shodan is a search engine for devices on the internet. It's located at shodan.io, and Shodan scans the internet and documents the devices it finds. And then it uses the device's service banners to figure out the device's model and software versions. So many hackers use Shodan as a way to perform technology fingerprinting without ever interacting with the server. Let's get started with a simple search. If you are not sure where to start and which search terms to use, you can go to Explore to see some of the most popular search terms and just to find random machines on the internet. For example, here you can see that Showdown indexes many webcams connected to the internet. And it's actually not uncommon to find unprotected webcams here that anyone can access. But a much more powerful way to use Showdown in your Recon is to use Showdown to research individual IP addresses of an organization. Let's search for a particular machine and take a look at what Showdown can reveal for us. First, let's use the Linux dig command to find out the IP of a particular site. We are going to use Showdown to research the server that hosts scanme.mmap.org. Here, we can see that this is the IP address of scanme.mmap.org. And then, we can go to showdown.io/host/the IP that we want to research to find information about that host. And here you can see that this Showdown page reveals the machine's open ports, the services running on each port, and their service banners. And on the left here, it shows the vulnerabilities associated with the target's software version numbers. You can do this for every IP you find in the target's organization's IP address range to look for vulnerable ports and services to attack. Next, let's take a look at another search tool called GreyHat Warfare. It's a search engine for public S3 buckets. And if you're not familiar with it, S3 is a service that Amazon offers for online data storage. And when you use S3, you store your data in Amazon's S3 buckets to serve them in your web applications, or just to use them as a backup location. And these S3 buckets can configure to be either publicly readable or confidential. And sometimes developers accidentally store sensitive information in public buckets. And in this case, you can go to these public buckets to find things like hidden endpoints, server logs, credentials, user information, source code, and a whole host of other information that might be useful to you. And GreyHat Warfare is one way to find these exposed S3 buckets. Let's go to its website at buckets.greyhatwarfare.com. And one of the first things that you can do here is to find random buckets or random files that are exposed to the internet. You can just click on the Random Files button here, and it will take you to a random public file. You can also search for public buckets based on keywords. Let's look for files that mention the term API token. And here you can see that we found some exposed files with the term API token in it. You can download the file by clicking on it, but we're not going to do that here. And besides file contents, you can also filter by an organization's name, its domain, its IP address, and so on in the keyword field. For example, you can search for buckets with the term facebook.com in its name or in its contents by typing facebook.com in the search bracket. You can also search for particular file types by filtering with file extension here. For example, if you want to look for configuration files, you can filter for the .conf extension. And if you want to look for log files, on the other hand, you can search for the .log extension, and so on. And in addition to using GreyHat Warfare to find exposed buckets, you can also use Google Docs instead. For example, the default URL for S3 buckets often have the term S3 and AmazonAWS.com in it. So you can search for a target's exposed buckets by searching for the page with a term AmazonAWS.com in its URL and the keywords associated with your target organization. Next up, let's talk about open source code repositories like GitHub and Bitbucket. These repositories are a direct window into a project's source code, so they're also a great source of intel for hackers. You can look into an organization's code repositories to research their application dependencies, their software versions, and to gain insight into any unresolved bugs, any input validation logic, security patches, as well as find any additional endpoints and functionalities. You can often even find accidentally committed credentials like API keys, as well as sensitive files such as log files and configuration files. Let's start by looking at how you can manually research a GitHub repository. Go to the organization that you want to research by searching for its name on GitHub. Then you can look at their repositories to get a feel of the technologies that the organization uses in their products. And then go to a specific research that you want to research. In the repo that you want to research, you can search for different keywords to find all kinds of sensitive information. For example, you can search for all the files that contain the keyword password. And searching for these keywords often reveal things like source code of password validation functionalities, as well as accidentally committed credentials. And here you can see that we found all the files in the repo that contains the word password. But in particular, you should look at the commits and issues sections. The commit section will show you how the code changed over time, and it will point you to the most recent code changes. Recent code changes are much more likely to contain bugs because they haven't been tested by the users as much. And the issue section show you the issues that people ran into with the code, and it can point you to a lot of the unresolved bugs and the potentially problematic code. So you can basically go through the repository searching for different keywords like API token, GitHub API key, access token, and so on. But obviously, manual GitHub Recon is a very time-consuming process. And a much better way of doing GitHub Recon is to automate the process using tools. For example, GitRob is an open source tool that finds potentially sensitive files pushed to public repositories. Let's take a look at it. You can download the tool by going to GitRob's GitHub page. And then you can navigate to GitRob's directory to start. Here, you can use the GitHub username that you want to target as the input. And then GitRob will find all the potentially sensitive files for that username by looking for keywords and special file extensions. You can see here that we already found some key store files and files that contain the keyword password. Let's go to the web interface of the output here. GitRob not only looks for current files, but it also looks into the commit history of each repository to find information there. So even if the account has deleted a sensitive file from their repository, as long as the commit history is still there, the GitRob will still be able to find it. And GitRob goes through the commit histories of the repositories and look for potentially sensitive files like log files, database files, and key files. You can then click on the flag files to access their contents. In addition to GitRob, there is another tool called TruffleHog that specifically looks for accidentally committed credentials committed to GitHub repositories. It works by searching for high entropy strings and checking for regex matches in commit histories. And after you download TruffleHog, you can run TruffleHog and then the path to the Git directory that you want to analyze. Then in TruffleHog's output, you can see a list of commits with potentially sensitive strings in it. You can then look into these commits and see if there are any leaked credentials that can be used on the target. Another source of information that you can use is code sharing sites like Pastebin and GitHub Gists. These sites allow users to share text documents via a link rather than via email or Google Doc. So developers often use them to share source code, configuration files, and log files that they want their coworkers to look at. But in these sites, the text files shared there are often public by default. So if developers accidentally share something on there that is sensitive by nature, you as the hacker will be able to read it as well. These code sharing sites are actually pretty infamous for leaking credentials like API keys and passwords. Let's take a look at Pastebin for example. When you post a text file on Pastebin, the file is actually public by default, and your paste will show up in the menu on the right here. Its contents will become completely public, and these files will also be indexed by search engines. Pastebin actually has an API that allows users to search for public paste files using a keyword, an email, or a domain name. And you can use this API to find sensitive files that belong to a certain organization. You can also use a tool like Pastebin Scraper to automate this process. Let's try it out. After downloading Pastebin Scraper, let's first cd into Pastebin's directory. Then type in the command scrape.sh-g password to look for all the public pastes that contain the keyword password. The -g option is used to indicate a general keyword search. And when it is done running, it will store the results in a separate directory. Let's go to that directory and look at the JSON output. Here you can see that the IDs of all the pastes that contain the keyword password. You can access the paste file by just going to pastebin.com/id. And similar to how you can search for Amazon S3 buckets associated with your target using Google, you can also search for Pastebin or GitHub Gist files using Google Docs. So to search for Pastebin files, you can use the search term site pastebin.com and then whatever keyword you want to search for. For example, you can search for site pastebin.com GitHub Access Token to look for Pastebin files that contain the keyword GitHub Access Token. And you can look for GitHub Gists by searching for site githubgist.com and then whatever keyword you are looking for. And for example, you can look for site gists.github.com API token to find all GitHub gists that contain API tokens. Let's now take a look at how you can research a target using Internet Archives. The WayBackMachine is an online archive of different websites at different points in time, and it's located at archive.org/web. You can use it to find hidden and deprecated endpoints, and also to find large number of current endpoints without actively crawling the site. And here you can simply search for a domain to see its past versions at different points in time. You can see that we found many past versions of facebook.com. And in addition, you can also add a /wildcard to this URL to get a list of all the archived URLs related to this domain. This usually takes a while to run, but after it runs, we should get a list of URLs that have been archived by the WayBackMachine. You can then see here that if there are any sensitive pages that have been archived. For example, to look for admin pages, we can search for /admin. You can also look for backup files and configuration files by searching for common file extensions like .conf or .env. Or look for source code files like JavaScript files or PHP files to look for vulnerabilities, API keys, hard-coded credentials, and sensitive endpoints. After searching, you just have to click on the link to see the snapshot of that archive page. You can click on a version to download it, and then from there, you can look for any sensitive info that will impact the security of the site. For example, are there any hard-coded credentials that can still be used? Or are there any leaked hidden endpoints that normal users shouldn't know about? Another way to use this functionality is to look for endpoints that would be vulnerable to certain vulnerabilities. For example, you can search for question marks in the URL to harvest URL parameters and test them for cross-site scripting or SQL injection vulnerabilities. And in addition to using security tools like the Pastebin API and the WayBackMachine, you can also do recon using information published by the organizations themselves. Public information like job posting for development positions, employees' LinkedIn and resumes, and the personal blogs of developers, and sites like Stack Overflow and Quora can all reveal a lot of information about an organization. For example, job postings are known for providing attackers info about a company's tech stack. From this job posting, for instance, you can pretty much tell which technologies that this particular company is using. You can use this information as a very good starting point for your research into your target. It's also pretty common for people to put the technologies and the skills that they have learned on a job on their resumes so that future employers will know that they have these particular skills. So, LinkedIn posts by engineering teams could also give you a window into the architecture and the dependencies of the application that that employee has worked on. And the same goes for the personal blogs of employees. Some developers use a personal tech blog to keep track of their learning, and they often reveal sensitive information about what they're currently working on their blogs. As for sites like Quora and Stack Overflow, where developers often go and ask technical questions, I often see screenshots and copy paste blocks of code and log files on there. And if developers aren't careful with what they're posting online, these postings and discussions can become a huge source for the attacker as well. You can find this type of information by looking through LinkedIn or their company's page to find the names of engineering staff and then searching them on Google or on LinkedIn. If you can find the social media accounts of the engineering staff, you could also look through their postings on Quora, Stack Overflow, GitHub, as well as Twitter. So in addition to these platforms, Stackshare.io is an online platform that allows developers to share their products' tech stacks. Not many organizations use it, but it's an amazing resource for hackers because we can simply look at the company or the product up on Stackshare to find out all the technologies and the tools that it is built with. For example, let's look up Uber.com in Stackshare's search bar. And here we can see that vault.uber.com is built with the JavaScript library React, the Flask framework, and the Jinja template engine. And if you are familiar with Jinja, you will know that it has been found to be vulnerable to server-side template injection attacks. So this will tell you that you should test Uber.com for SSTIs first because their architecture is prone to these vulnerabilities. And in addition to the stack information for each individual product, you can look for the company's profiles on Stackshare to see which technologies they are using. These are the technologies behind the organization's products, and it will give you a good understanding to how every application within the organization is built. Let's conclude by going over the tools that I talked about today. First, you can start your open source recon process by using Google Docs. You can find many useful search techniques by looking up the term Google search operators. And then you can go to exploit databases, Google hacking database to find security related search terms. There are also several intelligent search engines that will help you research targets. One of them is Shodan, which allows you to port scan and perform technology fingerprinting without ever interacting with the server. And you can use GreyHat Warfare and Google Dork to find exposed S3 buckets that belong to an organization. And online code repositories like GitHub and Bitbucket are also a great source of information for you. You can browse an organization's repositories to read about the logic of sensitive functionalities or to search for sensitive pieces of data such as credentials and hidden endpoints. And you can also use tools like GitRub or TruffleHog to automate this process. You can look into page-dump sites and archives like the WayBackMachine to find additional endpoints and files to analyze. And if you're lucky, you might even find a few credentials and passwords that can be used. To search pastebin efficiently, you can use the site's API or use open source tools written by other hackers. And for the WayBackMachine, you can add /wildcard to the URL to get a list of the archived URLs of that target. And finally, don't forget to utilize information that the organization published themselves to gain additional information about a target. Things like job postings, employees' LinkedIn and resumes, blog posts, Quora questions, and Stack Overflow questions posted by developers, and the company's profile on Stackshare can all reveal a lot of information about the company's tech stack. And that's it for this introductory view of how to conduct open source reconnaissance. Thank you for your time and thank you for being here today. Bye bye.